Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. I am delighted with this Dao De Jing series. It's turned out to be spectacular. So we are up to number 10. So the format is we are going to first read our favorite translations. We're going to put, and number 10 is particularly amazing. So we're going to read our translations, and after that, we're going to start discussion. So, and we'll take as much time as we need for the discussions and then go from there. We're going to start with Jason. Jason, go ahead. And folks, if you want to read your translation, I encourage you to do that, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat.
Okay, everybody, I would say chapter 10 is extremely difficult for me to translate, okay, because I try to make it as close, as faithful as possible. And the challenge is I try to set a rule. Whenever a Chinese word are the same word, I should translate English in the same word. So I will explain a little bit more later, and let me, just as a tradition, I read the Chinese first, then I'm going to read the English version. And then when you read your own translation, I'm going to post my translation in the chat, so you can do it. And then I will, and if you have a question, and we can discuss later, okay? So let me read the Chinese first, chapter 10. 在营破抱衣，能无离乎？专气自柔，能如婴儿乎？涤除玄染，能无痴乎？爱民治国，能无为乎？天门开合，能为雌乎？明白事达，能无知乎？ Then here's the conclusion. 生之处之，生而不有，为而不恃，长而不宰，是谓玄德。Okay, so let's finish. If you can remember, I always say who for 6 times. That means the Dao De Jing is ask 6 questions. See whether or not you can do this. Then draw a conclusion. And I'm going to read my translation. The so-called, I decide to call it the mysterious virtue. Okay, so-called 玄德, that's the word. Okay, that's the word. Okay, I'm going to use. So the translation I'm going to use is thank amount to polish on this one. So can you keep mind and the body together without separating them? Can you focus your qi and be supple like a newborn baby? Can you cleanse your mysterious reflections without flaw? Can you love your people and govern your state with wu wei, no action? Can you open and shut heaven's gate like a woman? Can you understand and see far without bias? The conclusion, multiply your people and real them. Multiply them without possession. Lead them without control. This is called mysterious virtue. So I do this one when I was in New York. So I see this word, mysterious. That's a Japanese barbecue. Okay, so I just take a picture. Look like, you know, it's just something happened, you know, when I do the translation. Okay, thank you. And I will hear a different kind of translation. Then we can have a further discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jason. Really appreciate that. Next up, so I encourage you to read your favorite translation. Next up is Judith, followed by Joe. Judith.
Okay, this is Stephen Mitchell translation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you coax your mind from its wandering and keep to the original oneness? Can you let your body become supple as a newborn child's? Can you cleanse your inner vision until you see nothing but the light? Can you love people and lead them without imposing your will? Can you deal with the most vital matters by letting events take their course? Can you step back from your own mind and thus understand all things? Giving birth and nourishing, having without possessing, acting with no expectations, leading and not trying to control, this is the supreme virtue.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is Joe, Star, and Jyoti. Joe.
So I'm going to read from the Wayne Dyer version. It's actually very similar to the Stephen Mitchell version as well. Carrying body and soul and embracing the one, can you avoid separation? Can you let your body become as supple as a newborn child's? In the opening and shutting of heaven's gate, can you play the feminine part? Can you love your people and govern your domain without self-importance? Giving birth and nourishing, having yet not possessing, working yet not taking credit, leading without controlling or dominating. One who heeds this power brings the Tao to the very earth, to this very earth. This is the primal virtue.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Star, followed by Jyoti. Star, go ahead.
To embrace the, oh, this is actually by Peiji Wang from Australia. To embrace the divine one with your soul, are you able to maintain the oneness without separation? To focus on your breath to relax, are you able to reach to the softness like a newborn? To cleanse your mystic inner vision, are you able to make it without stain? To love the citizens and govern the country, are you able to do so without intelligence? When the heavenly whole opens and shuts in delivering, can it be possible without being a female? To be enlightened, are you able to strive without purpose? That giving birth and nourishing it, producing without possessing it, serving without expectation, leading rather than controlling, are the mystical DE. And in the footnote, DE is the mark of the Tao's presence or connectedness in individual or in a group. It is the level of Tao's reflection in the manifested beings.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Star. Next up is Jyoti, Brian, and David. Jyoti.
Rest your shining spirit and embrace the one. Can you forever hold on to it? Concentrate your breath and attain the utmost softness. Can you become a baby? Clean your mysterious mirror. Can you keep it free from blemish? Love the people and keep the state in peace. Can you rule through no action? As the gate of heaven opens and closes, can you play the female part? As bright light reaches all four directions, can you remain unknowing? To give people life and nurture them, to give them life without possessing them, to rule them without depending on them, to lead them without directing them. This is called the mysterious Thay, translated by Kim Ha Poon.
Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is Brian, David, and Allison. Brian.
This is from the DC Lao version. When carrying on your head your perplexed bodily soul, can you embrace in your arms the one and not let go? In concentrating your breath, can you become as supple as a babe? Can you polish your mysterious mirror and leave no blemish? Can you love the people and govern the state without resorting to action? When the gates of heaven open and shut, are you capable of keeping to the role of the female? When your discernment penetrates the four quarters, are you capable of not knowing anything? It gives them life and rears them. It gives them life, yet claims no possession. It benefits them, yet exacts no gratitude. It is the steward, yet exercises no authority. Such is called the mysterious virtue.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is David, followed by Allison.
Yes, thanks again. This is the translation by Herman Ould from 1946. As I mentioned the last time, I think this really parallels a lot of the great translation that Jason's doing as well. So I find it sort of interesting contrast. So the translation is, can you control the restless physical being and at the same time hold fast to the oneness of the universe? Can you so regulate your breathing that it becomes soft and effortless like a child's? Can you sponge away the dust from the surface of the mysterious mirror, leaving nothing obscure? Can you love the people and govern the country while remaining yourself unknown? Can you, opening and shutting nature's gates, remain passive, playing the woman's part? Can you penetrate all quarters and understand all creatures and yet not interfere? Very well then, quicken them, nourish them, give life to them, but make no claim on them. Govern them, but do not be dependent upon them. Be chief among them, but do not order them about. This is to use the mysterious power.
Thank you, David. Next up is Allison.
Okay, this is by Sam Torrid. By patience, you can discipline your desires. By self-control, you can develop strong character. By practicing gentleness, you become as a little child. By purifying the subconscious, you may become perfect. Because wise rulers love the people, they lead without using force. In measuring out rewards, wise rulers act like mother birds. While seeing into every corner, they are unobtrusive. While protecting the people, they do not control them. They are motherly and fatherly, but not domineering. They persuade with words, not weapons. This is their crowning virtue.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. I'm going to read from Ursula Le Guin's translation. Can you keep your soul in its body, hold fast to the one, and so learn to be whole? Can you center your energy, be soft, tender, and so learn to be a baby? Can you keep the deep water still and clear so it reflects without blurring? Can you love people and run things and do so by not doing? Opening, closing the gate of heaven, can you be like a bird with her nestlings? Piercing bright through the cosmos, can you know by not knowing? To give birth, to nourish, to bear and not to own, to act and not lay claim, to lead and not to rule. This is the mysterious power. And in the footnotes, she says, most of the scholars think this chapter is about meditation, its techniques, and fulfillment. The language is profoundly mystical. The images are charged, rich in implications. The last verse turns up in nearly the same words in other chapters. There are several such refrains throughout the book, identical or similar lines repeated once, twice, or 3 times. All right, so now we're going to discuss this number 10. Any general comments? So we'll start with any general comments on number 10. What do you get from this chapter? What do you get from this poem? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to share what you get from this. I'm going to start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I mean, I kind of agree with the Ursula Le Guin interpretation and the idea that it's incorporating some type of mindfulness into it, with the idea of between the mind and body, at least in the interpretation that I have had and the many that I've read. Ultimately, I look at this as it's a gradual progression into the feminine and remaining modest. And eventually the idea of having power and not using it. So I think that this is essential. I mean, I can go into deep into more detail in the sense of each verse, but these are some general takeaways. The importance of letting go of one's ego and embracing the feminine. It's because the feminine is more receptive and more accepting, whereas the yin or yang is much more rigid. And so I see that the element there where on my particular one that says in the opening and shutting of heaven's gate, can you play the feminine part? Can you love your people and govern your domain without self-importance? So there's this idea of being open, and eventually the area that I thought that was the most significant to me was the idea of having yet not possessing, working yet not taking credit, leading without controlling or dominating. And that to me is a way of understanding the importance of what you're doing and not tying yourself to the outcomes of of nature. Like, so if you're working, enjoying the journey, but not necessarily tying yourself. And it's a form of detachment to things and material things in and of themselves. But ultimately, one who heeds this power brings the Tao to this very earth. This is the primal virtue. Again, I think that this is talking about the importance of having some type of power and not using it. So it's having these things, but not using it and living in accordance with nature. That's my initial interpretation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Star, Phil, Marco, and Madeline. Star, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing that, Joseph. So much the how to me, the virtues, the definition of internal doing. So the definition of success looks like this following the Tao. And it looks like all of the ways that are pointed. It could be seen maybe, these are the 10 commandments, you know? I mean, this is a summary of what the whole thing is about, this poem that we, study. And the first word that came to mind when you asked what we think it's about is purity.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Star. Next up is going to be Phil, Marco, and Madeline.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's said, but I had a very, very different way of getting to it. To me, it's really the expression of 1, 2, and 3. 1 being the ontology of oneness, the whole, the unity of oneness. 2 is the metaphysics of the opposition of forces. And 3 is about moving between the 2 forces so you find a path. And the way I look at it is at this descent from 1 to 2 to 3, he's finally gotten to living beings, in this case, human beings, that we are now finding ourselves in this path of moving between these opposites, whether that's good and evil, or whether that's strength and weakness, all these things. And I think he's talking about, I was going to add virtue, because action is manifested through virtue. Our virtue is manifested through action. But it led me to choose another word. Virtuous action, proper action seems too sterile, seems confusion. So I chose the word arate, which is a kind of virtue of excellence in action. And I think this is a direction of how the oneness could be manifested, unfolded into 2, and the 2 into the 3, and the 3 is a guidance to, in a sense, all actions that man must have, including the action to create virtue. And I think he's talking about somehow balancing these oppositions to get the wholeness of being, in a sense, in this living action. And I think that's guiding yourself to understand that it's not just one way. You must understand these forces in order to act in the world in the proper way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phil. Phil, can you repeat one more time what 1, 2, and 3 are?
I think one is the ontology of everything. That is, everything is the whole.
Mhm.
And 2 is really the metaphysics bringing down the ontology to, in a sense, a degree of comprehension of the forces that make up the whole, the yin and the yang, you know, men and women, feminine, masculine, all these forces that we live in. And that 3 is about action, introducing man moving through 2 to the 3, and in a sense, living, but living in a virtuous way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Next up is Jason, Marco, Madeline, and Andrew. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I like to focus on the 6 questions. Okay, the 6 question based on the original text. Okay, the first one talking about the can you keep mind and the body together without separate. Okay, I think Joe talked about having power but not using it. I think it's like that's the essence. Basics. If you pay attention on these 6 questions, basics is a passive, a negative. So the first ask you whether or not you can keep mind and the body together without separate. I'm talking about the Chinese text. Okay, text. Okay, and the second question talk about can you hold your qi, okay, like a baby. Okay, baby. Okay, basics is negative, right? Basics is not a man, so like negative. The third talk about either people translate as inner vision, or my translation, I would prefer use mysterious reflection, consider as distraction thought without flaw. That's the word-to-word translation. Number 4, talk about governing your country and loving your people. Wu wei means without action. Okay, that's another negative. Number 5, open shut the heaven's gate like a woman. Sorry for the ladies. Woman, also a negative, a passive term, talk about not man, right? And the number 6, talk about understand, see far away in 4 direction or all direction. I think another translation called knowing without knowing, something like this. Basics, the words in Chinese is no knowing. So also a negative. So basics, this 6 question is ask you to achieve something with a negative way or passive way. Okay, so I think that's the key here. That's why I like what Joe talked about. The whole essence is you have the power, right? Having the power, but not really using it. You just hold back, and I think that's the essence here. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to repost what Jason wrote. Let me go ahead and do that. Next up is going to be Marco, followed by Madeline. Marco.
Yeah, for me, it's I think it drives home the point of like non-action, like when you're sort of like when your mind is like in a state of turmoil. Sometimes it's best to just like sit back and sort of like not letting go of control, and you know, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Next up is going to be Madeline, Andrew, Katie, and Allison. Madeline.
Yes, I am curious about the phrase Heaven's Gate, or the gates of heaven. This seems to be the first time in our sequential reading that heaven is a place with a gate that can be opened or closed, that it can be barred to someone or not, and that it's the passive, the yin quality that is the opener and closer. And I'm wondering if perhaps Jason could address what the connotations of the having a gate for heaven would be in the time that this was written?
Sure. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to answer this one because yeah, this one is a specifically difficult one. My translation just word by word translation. Can you open and shut heaven's gate like a woman? Okay, so I believe, I read a lot of Chinese interpretation. A lot of people talk about, some are scholars, some are just commentators, talk about the heaven's gate means assume you are the emperor, and the heaven's gate means how are you going to deal with people? So you should be like a mother. And some talk about heaven's gate is your, like, your school. Okay, so your consciousness, how are you going to know things? So you should be like a woman. Okay, be humble, something like. I'm not sure, that's the right way to do it. So I decided to just put the original text, basically talk about deal with heaven stuff. My understanding is deal with the heaven or divine affair. Because in the ancient time, you have to deal with the secular affair, you have to deal with divine affair. For example, have the drought, okay, then you have to worship for the rain. That's very common, right? If we have a flood, you have to worship to the heaven. So that's something, or you have, whether or not you have to wage a war, then you have to do the divination, right? To find out whether or not it's a good way, which is a good day, what day is a good day to start, to wage a war or do something or get married. Okay, that's all important stuff. So I think they suggest is being like a woman, okay? So, I believe the word they are using is kind of like in hint a woman sexual behavior, okay? Or open, close, not so dominating. That's my understanding of the original text. And of course, it's up to you to interpret, what they imply. So that's the one of the difficult part on this text. Yeah. Thank you. I hope I answer your question. So
thank you, Jason. Next up is going to be Amon. Amon, go ahead.
Excuse me, you caught me right in the moment of choking. Excuse me. I wanted to piggyback off of what Jason was saying, excuse me, about the negative quality. I think there's a value judgment that we often attribute when we hear a term like negative. And I think that if I'm not misinterpreting you, Jason, when you're talking about negative, you're talking more in the sense of not passive versus active, not good or bad. And this is one of the more abstruse chapters or verses in the whole book, but it feels like the warm up to the advice given later. I believe it's verse 28 when it says, know the young, but keep to the yin. This is where you're starting to see that laid out for whoever this advice is being handed to, can you possibly lead without domineering, without trying to overshadow? Can you use these yin principles, these passive principles, to improve yourself, improve your environment, improve the people that you are responsible for? And yeah, I agree with Jason about the Heaven's Gate interpretation as a thinly veiled metaphor, which is probably one of the most salacious things written in the entire Dao De Jing, but it's done so cleverly and so subtly as to be almost a wink and a nod to people who would read this and go, oh, as they think to themselves how better to be more effective.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is Andrew, Katie, and Allison. Andrew. Andrew, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, so in comparing some of the interpretations, something I thought I was looking for comparisons, and if these things could be distilled to something simpler, because I'm proposing this, that I think we may have maybe a desire to see these as kind of multi-layered and kind of poems that have sophisticated elements, and we're trying to kind of tease out all kinds of interesting nuances. But I think that these can be distilled down into very straightforward concepts. So this is my interpretation of what this really all is saying. Remain fresh and open, and nourish and protect selflessly. That's basically what this is about. That's my sense. So in a way, to me, that's like, I like it better because it just captures the whole thing, and you don't need to get all unnecessarily intellectual about it. I'm not judging anybody, but I think that's what can happen with these things. I say the simpler can be, the more profound it is.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up is Katie and Allison. Katie.
I'm kind of repeating what Joseph and Marco said, but in slightly different words. I think like if you work in power, one of like the criticisms you'll get is like you're just about the power. And I think it's kind of saying that too, like as a, it's not about trying to get people to do it the way that you like it. It's kind of the same, the water analogy, the going with the flow. I think also this is kind of you can kind of see it like written towards the leaders again in like who it was written for.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Next up is Allison. Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just really noticing how different the translations are, because mine doesn't say anything at all about Heaven's Gate or about women at all. It's really just all about how to be a good leader. And I mean, it seems like a lot of it is really just about, it's leading without force, and that the best way to lead is, like leaders tend to fall into people who micromanage everything, or people who hire good people and leave them alone to do their job. And I feel like this is really kind of about that, about just, you have to be less controlling to accomplish more.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Krishna. Kevin. Kevin, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, next up is Krishna.
I see the yang quality as being like an ego. It takes ownership of everything that we do, but what we do is really not what the ego does. It's what the mind itself, the underlying, the Buddha does. And that is the yin. If the yang gets out of the way and listens to the Buddha, the mind underneath the ego, then things can progress.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krishna. Next up is Jason, followed by Kevin. Jason.
Yeah, that kind of the response, what Edison talked about the translation are very different. I pay much attention on the translation. In a way, I would say they all correct. Okay, that's not, I don't see anything wrong. If you ask me what's wrong, I would say one thing I not agree, which is the last translation. We talk about the inner power, but I translate it as a virtue. Okay, so I'm not sure how everybody responds to the word power, but I just have to disagree on any translation have to translate as power. So I think the word can be virtual, could be, well, I cannot think about other things, but power is not the word. I will agree. And then just like but my work here, I mentioned last time, I just want to bring everything back to the original text, and then so we will know, what we are reading. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Kevin, followed by Phil. Kevin.
I think now you can hear me, right?
Yes, but if you could speak into the
Okay,
mic so we can hear. Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, first I'll make a comment. I would say, Phil mentioned one good points about when you do do or doing. It's first stay neutral. That's your point. Like our modern practice more stay the action side, which is young, it's more positive. We neglect, ignore the negative side. So for example, here, like one thing that Chinese called Tianmen and Jason put a heaven of gate. If another translation could be like 5 sentences in our head: ear, eyes, and mouth, and a nose. You can see it's in and out breathe, right? And eyes you blink, and mouth we open and close, and our ear we hear. They also a sense tool in, and you hear, you absorb it. So from that way, you can understand eventually it's the conclusion part. So when we generate, but we don't want to own it. So that's why the last word is called mystery. It's virtue. It's hard. Like you generate a billionaire. How do you own those? Let's see, share those wealthy with people. Make it a big virtue. That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Phil, followed by Amon. Phil.
I think most people here have interpreted as inaction or passive action. I think this is more of a warning against humanity's tendency to think in terms of pushing action or progressive action, or how we really think of action. And I think he's just telling you by restating it, don't forget about inaction as well. But on the other hand, I don't think he's just saying no action, because action is needed. So therefore, this is really to bring you back to balance, that in effect, humanity, because we are beasts of burden to a certain degree, is forced to move in the direction of acting. And that is our nature. And so therefore, we must also bring back our nature to some sort of form, because without action, there's also no movement. But with only action, there's also no movement, because you just move in one direction and you keep going on. So I think the point here is to think in terms of the balance, like Tai Chi, you can't move your hand forward without eventually moving it backwards. So therefore, I don't think you need to overstress inaction or passive action. It's really the movement to this tension of the opposites that you have to negotiate through life. And he just wants to bring back, don't stress the active part so much that you forget about the withdrawing part.
Thank you, Phil. I mean, I see it whenever I think about this, I think of it as visually. There is kind of outside action, but there is a center from which the action is coming and ending up with. And that center is quite stable. And I think it's kind of distinguishing between, don't get too much focused on the outside movement that is taking place, but see kind of the center from which it is coming and to which it is going. Next up is Amon. Amon, go ahead.
Thank you. And this time I won't choke. I just wanted to say a quick word on what Jason was saying about the translation of that very last character that he translates as virtue, and he said is sometimes rendered as power. I do think virtue is a better translation of it, but I do think that it needs a little context in terms of our understanding of what we mean when we say that word. We think when we talk about virtue that we're talking about almost the sort of, again, Aristotelian sort of virtue ethic virtues, whereas I think it's being used a little more archaically here when somebody might say something like, oh, that tree has healing virtues, or that river has calming virtues. So it is a emanating property of, and if anyone translates it as power, that's probably where that's derived from. But it's one of the three words in Dao De Jing. It's the center de. And it is the more yang of the two. Dao, much more yin, de, much more yang. So
wonderful.
There's something very balanced in this and ending with a yang note.
Wonderful. That was amazing, Aman. Thank you. Next up is Jason, followed by Brian. Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Aman. I think that that's a good remind me about I probably consider the word de or virtue just too lightly. Okay, so when Aman talk about this one, remind me one thing. Probably the close word is the Hindu word guna. Okay, probably means the quality of something less than ethical meaning. Okay, I see Shrinkant not head. So probably it's guna. Probably there's now, and in Buddhism translation, Buddhism the three gunas. The Buddhism translates as three de, three virtue. So it probably really means the quality more than the ethical Aristotelian ethical sense. So another thing I like to show my screen for a moment. Okay. So the thing is, I think they have hold on, let me see. Sorry, do you only see the Chinese part, right?
Yes.
Do you see the English part now?
Yes.
Okay, so I like to I'm glad that nobody translate this one as religious Taoism. Okay, I look like everybody is a philosopher here. Nobody think this one is a religious Taoism, but this one has a lot of religious Taoism. They come in from here. If you read this word poor, okay, in poor, okay, that's your soul, okay, that's no doubt. They talk about your soul, okay. So they talk about baby, okay, and they use a lot of xuan, okay, this word, deep mysterious, and talk about Tianmen, like the Tianmen, the heavens gate, talk about female, okay. So this one are very easy to be and talk about qi here, okay. Qi, this word, 专气自柔, okay. So here's qi, okay. Qi like a baby. So look at they talk about soul, okay. Talk about qi, talk about female, talk about xuan, which is mysterious, and talk about the heaven's gate. So a lot of religious Taoism are based on this text, okay, this chapter. They have others, okay, to translate, okay, to make it. And another thing I like to show everybody is the difficult part here. If you look at the three, that's the word, okay, xuan, which means, I translate as mysterious, okay, but that's something, mysterious vision or inner vision you want to remove, so make it flawless or make it clear, right? But at the end, it called xuan de, which is mysterious virtue, okay? So that's the same word, okay? So I just cannot accept if you translate or any translation use two different words for the same Chinese character. They must mean same thing. I cannot accept they mean different. For example, like this one, if you can see this word and this word are the same. So you must say you do something but not doing something. So I think that's the part I'm working on. I hope the ideal word in the ideal translation is when you translate to English, then you translate, you should know That's the get the original Chinese, not all over the place. That's I try to achieve. A little bit difficult, but I just share with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Next up is Brian, followed by Phil. Brian, go ahead.
There's been talk about the feminine a lot in this presentation, and I like the word quality rather than virtue. But the word, I think to me, the word that came to mind when I was reading this was, yes, feminine, I wrote that down, but more precisely, motherly or motherhood. I think these virtues, these qualities are really come to the fore, are very useful in motherhood. They're essential in the excellence of motherhood. The first of these, I'm looking at the J.H. MacDonald, which really kind of, to me, brings that out. Giving birth and nourishing, making without possessing. If you try to possess a child, I can tell you, a young child, that is not going to work. And the expecting nothing in return. Yes, you better expect nothing in return from your children. It is that, it might come, but it'll be a gift. To allow, I would say to allow to grow, yet not to control. This is the mysterious virtue. So all these things this is motherhood. And then the first part or the longer part, the last bit talks, you take starting with the word, can you love people and lead them without forcing your will on them? You have to do that with children. But everything starting with that verse and coming down, that's dealing with the outside world. Everything before that's kind of dealing with the internal world. And it's suggesting, I think, the same type of approach to your mind. So that's what I've got.
Brian, that was amazing, because I think bringing in children here and kind of approach to children, I think captures something really fundamental, because people get it. Like, you love the child, you want the best for the child, you lead the child, but in a way which is consistent with the nature of the child. So I think it captures beautifully. Thank you. And I also want to say, the concept of guna in Sanskrit or in Indian language, it is quality, but it's like inherent quality, some kind of virtue that you have, which is completely kind of part of you and expresses itself through everything that you do. So it's this inherent quality of good behavior, if you would, that is captured. Thank you. And Jason, thanks for bringing that up. Next up is going to be Judith, followed by Phil. Judith.
Yeah, I really just want to say that that's exactly the impression I got when I was reading what Brian was saying. Like the first part of it is if I understood him correctly, is that inward part, and the second part is that outward part and how you act. And I thought, not really motherhood, parenthood. Anybody who's been a parent knows that it's like really the best example of what it is to have and not possess. And the other thing I just wanted to add is that I think Shrikant, you said in the version you read, because when I read this, as I started reading my own version, the first 6 lines, coaxing your mind from its wandering to keep to the original oneness. All of this reminded me of what happens when you meditate. Your mind is wandering. You have to quiet it, bring it to the oneness, by not acting. You can't, it's not something you can do forcibly. And then, you notice that your body's tight sometimes, and you can feel that relaxation. And my verse says, your body becomes supple as a newborn child's. So that's why it made me think of that. It could just be my translation. And, cleansing your inner vision until you can see nothing but light. So it's all this kind of like quieting, letting go, that non-action, like loving people without imposing your will. It's very, it's very, I don't know, it's very non-action, but with a kind of like a purpose. It has a center to it. And then, you know, the way Brian was saying, then that is how it acts out in those last verses, you know, where you recognize you can have and not possess, you can act, but not have expectations. And that's the quietest, most peaceful way, or sometimes that you can live in the world, you know, without always using force to get things, or even, you know, force is a rough word, but that's sometimes how we approach everything. Everything happens by like, I gotta make this happen.
Thank you, Judith. I want to read the last 3 lines from my friend Yasuhiko's translation, and it captures the point that Brian was making. It says, birthing life without possessing, nourishing life without expecting, rearing life without dominating. I mean, that's really the essence of good parenting. So thank you. Next up is going to be Phil, Madeline, and Rupali. Phil.
Yeah, I just want to ask Jason to clarify his statement about words in Chinese as being, if you use the same word, it must mean the same thing. I want to clarify because the way he said it sounds like there's no ambiguities in words. It says what it means, exactly what it says. By that token, it also means there's no sense of synonymy in the Chinese language as well, which is sort of interesting because it would mean that words are a perfect mirror to the ideas. And I find that difficult to understand, because how could Chinese have poetry? Because it's merely saying exactly what needs to be said, rather than something that could be translated, interpreted. I just want that to be clarified. I think you do not mean that, but it sounded like that.
Thank you, Phil, to mention this. Yes, that's what I'm not meaning one-to-one match. Okay, I think you get the point. Yeah, thank you for let me clarify it. Yeah, basically what I meant is just use this this chapter as an example. They talk about the word 玄, right? They say the 玄 vision, or 玄, we translate as inner vision, right? At the end, they call 玄德, and then should we translate as inner virtue or inner? So these 2 words in Chinese per se, they means the same thing, okay, in this chapter. But when we translate to English, we probably need to get the same word, okay? But sometimes one Chinese word have multiple meaning used in different places that means something. We all agree they have this case that we have to translate to different way. But sometimes I cannot agree is when they call 玄, this word mystery with vision, then you call it inner. But when they call 玄 with virtue, you call it supreme or super, right? That's the opposite meaning. So that's the area I'm struggle. I try to have kind of like in the Dao De Jing, Dao is a concept. We have especially for this word 玄 has been used for, I don't know, at least 10 times. We should have some kind of standard meaning, standard translation in English. If we can't, we probably keep the original Chinese sub, 玄. Okay, whenever we say 玄 vision, whenever we say 玄 version. Okay, that's I try to achieve, you know. Thank you.
Well, thank you for relieving me of logical positivism.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Madeline, Rupali, and Patricia. Madeline.
This is kind of two topics, but they're related. It's just difficult to formulate them together. What Jason had said in response to my question about Heaven's Gate and a woman, because specifically, this is one place where the Tao talks about the role of a woman rather than a woman's qualities or the feminine or the yin or something. It brought to mind some reading I did a while back on the history of Taoism. And apparently the early Buddhists in China were quite scandalized by the behaviors of the Taoist nuns and monks, who lived separately and would get together once a month for what was called the sharing of the breath. This is a PG rated group here, but I think you can all figure out what that is. And the Buddhists were just horrified by it. And I'm wondering if, so in connection, not necessarily with that, but Jason, you had mentioned that the something about this poem being more of the basis of religious Taoism. And if you could just cover briefly what you mean by religious Taoism and its practices. Maybe this is a topic for a whole different session, but as opposed to the sort of philosophical Taoism we're talking about here.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, probably I should not bring the religious Taoism here because in other group, when we discuss, when I find out a lot of people mix with religious Tao and the philosophical Tao. And look like this group, we have no confusion.
Right.
I remember when my son was in high school, the school asked my son to write an article because he's Chinese about the Chinese Taoism, okay? And as a philosophy or social study. But the book the teacher gave to him, it all talk about the mystery worship, you know, the heaven. That's totally missing. And I try to teach my son, but of course, you know, the kids always listen to teacher than your parents. So I have no way to change him. Okay, because he want to get a good grade. So that's why I'm so cautious on that. And just like Madeline said, there's a lot of slandering, you know, and some are true, some are not true. I try not to comment on that, you know, just like we talk about church, what happening in the church, you know, some true, some not true, some good, some dirty. We don't know, you know, but I'm glad that this group, we all treat this one as a philosophical Tao, not a religious Tao. But of course, we can talk about religious Tao if you have question on that. But this one, a lot of people think about the Dao De Jing is the source of yin and yang and the Tao, but actually it's not. If we, it's the Qi, okay, you talk about Tao, but not talk much on the Qi. In the whole 81 chapter, they only mention Qi 3 times. Okay, here's the first time, okay? And only mention yin and the yang. Okay, of course you can say heaven is yang and earth is deep, but I talk about the words yin and yang once on chapter 42. Okay, so is that yin and yang and qi not important? No, it's important. But why Dao De Jing not talk about this? Because they pre-exist, has been happened 1,000 years before Dao De Jing, so they don't have to mention it. They just, you know, so that's why I only mention one time in yin yang and one time in qi. Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is Rupali, followed by Patricia. Rupali.
Thank you. So well, one thing I felt about this is just learning to center yourself and more like meditation and really understanding just who you are. Probably it also brings to mind the 17th verse about acting simply. And I feel that earlier, Jason, I think, said that there's a lot of repetition within these verses. And I see that even in Indian texts or prayers, you know, where they repeat the same things again and again. And is it because we just need those reminders? It's so hard to achieve the state, or that they are so connected, the virtues or the ideas. I feel that in verse 7, where we are talking about the leaders, and how the leaders, the different levels of leaders, but the leader being somebody, the highest level of leader being somebody who does things without being noticed. And in this case, doing your action without really having any, like without controlling or without possessing. So just kind of letting things take, make them happen. I wonder if there's a connection between the two. Thank you.
Jason, followed by Amon. Jason.
Yeah, that's a quick. Thank you, Rapali. Talk about this one. Yeah, that's one thing in the translation. I think I also in the group the reading Bhagavad Gita. Okay, in every Thursday. Okay, so I think all the translation they miss something. Okay, but doing this one when I read Bhagavad Gita, I know how far away. Okay, when I read English to the original text, because I know how far away from English Dao De Jing to the Chinese Dao De Jing. So even I have no way to really understand the original Bhagavad Gita, but at least I know how far away from the original Bhagavad Gita. Translation working on another thing I try to preserve, just like Rupali talked about, it was a song, right? It's like a poem. They have their tone. I don't want to change the tone too much. Okay, if they are repeating, when I translate to English, I should repeat it, right? So, and the purpose of repeating, I believe, is original. I think they've kind of like a local folk song. People collect it and polish it, and same as Bhagavad Gita. I don't think that's like one person sit down and write down all this one. They must have a lot of story, a lot of song they collect, and collectively they form something. So I try not to lose this kind of flavor because it's not pure philosophical writing. They have their literature sense, historical sense, and artistic sense. And I think we should preserve. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I wanted to comment one thing. Rupali is, runs a Montessori school, and she's going to do a presentation on Maria Montessori on Saturday at 2:30. And if you look at the core idea of Maria Montessori and her approach towards a child, it is very much the kind of approach that Dao De Jing is talking about. It's the same kind of ideas that Brian was talking about. It is, for example, the way in which Maria Montessori puts it is that she thinks that a child is an independent being. And what a teacher does is to create a good environment for the child and then watch. Most of the action is being done by the child herself. And the teacher is standing there, very observant. And whenever is needed, gives a little bit of help. But most of the work is being done by the child itself. And that's exactly the kind of approach towards social interaction that Dao De Jing is talking about. It is profoundly respectful of individual soul and the nature of nature. And you're simply trying to work with it. Thank you. Next up is going to be Amon, Patricia, Krishna, Joe, and Phil. Amon.
Thank you. I wanted to address a little bit Madeline's inquiry about religious Taoism, and I think it also ties very well with what Jason was saying about repetition and Rupali was talking about with repetition. By the 2nd century, Zhang Daoling had started the first religious Taoist sect in southern China, and unfortunately that turned into a religious uprising. But the Way of the Celestial Master sect of Taoists are still in existence to this day. One of the practices that Zhang would have his practitioners do was to recite the Dao De Jing. That was one of the religious scriptures they followed. And if you listen to it being recited in Chinese, you hear where that repetition has a aesthetic value and not merely a sort of pedantic translation from exact phrasing. So that very opening passage, you know, the Tao that can be told is not the, there's many ways we translate it into English, but in Chinese, it's just Dao ke Dao, Fei Cheng Dao, Ming ke Ming, Fei Cheng Ming. And you can almost hear the rhythm of it. Dao ke Dao, Fei Cheng Dao, Ming ke Ming, Fei Kong Ming. And you can see how that could become a meditative practice and how that has a sort of driving force, almost like a Buddhist Om. And so fixating on some of these particular words like xuan or a few others, it really focuses the mind on something to dwell on, to hopefully gain a greater degree of insight and enlightenment. And the distinction between philosophy and religion that we have much more distinctly culturally in a Western world was pretty non-existent for most of Chinese history. There were Taoists of many flavor, from the more religious to the more scholarly to the more philanthropic to the more iconoclastic, and they all just shared certain elements that they would all agree, not necessarily that it made them a Taoist, but a student or follower or a inquisitor of the Tao.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. I wanted to say one thing. This is from, we're doing a bunch of meetups on the nature of language. And one thing to understand is that most of these people at that time were not able to read. So there is big difference between an oral culture and a written culture. The way in which an oral culture holds on to something is through repetition. So for example, the Indian culture, there is a tradition. They have surnames like Dvivedi and Trivedi. What they mean is that they can, Trivedi means they can recite 3 Vedas. Each Veda is about this thick pile of books. So they can actually recite the whole thing. The same thing with people who recited Homer. They were able to recite, and it is through repetition that you hold everything. The other thing is that, you know, these are very deep ideas, and to actually hold on to the ideas, you actually have to repeat it in multiple ways, and each repetition, it's not an exact repetition. It's slightly different, and it focuses the mind in a slightly different way. And in any case, you are trying to use this book to focus a mind in a certain way. So a massive amount of repetition is actually just what the doctor ordered for many reasons. Thank you, Rupali. Great comment. Jason, did you have anything to add, or shall we go to Patricia?
No, I'm
okay.
fine. I'm listening.
Very good. I lost track of the exclamation mark. Sorry about that. Patricia, go ahead. Sorry, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Thank you. When I was reading this, and I just took it very for face value, I kept asking myself, well, why would I do it? Why would I follow these questions? Because in my version, it says, can you marry? Can you ride? Can you cleanse? Can you love? Can you bear? Can you give wisdom? Can you nourish? And these are profound virtues. And I was asking myself, well, why would I? What is the end? What do you end up with if you use these internal activities? Because to me, it's all in a lot of internal action is happening here. And I do feel it's very female, and I do feel it's very motherly. But I also feel it's why do I feel it's very smart? What am I ending up with? Why is this even in the poem? And I'm coming up with a great deal of trust. There's something I'm trusting in that's other than myself. So that, you can label it nature, or you could add a religious aspect to it, but there's something other than myself that seems to be a profound, giving it to something other than myself is a profound virtue. And why not use outer action? Why not use external means? So that to me was just, it's telling me there's something other than the self and the environment. There's something I'm trusting in.
Wonderful. I think I really like your use of word trust, because I think that is fundamental to this. This is about trusting nature. It is about accepting nature, kind of loving nature, reverence for nature, trusting nature. And that is the substrate of pretty much everything that is being said. So wonderful, thank you. Next up is Krishna, Rich, Joe, and Phil. Krishna.
Ursula Le Guin once wrote a essay on rhyme and rhythm and so on in prose and poetry. And basically what she found, or what she exposited, was that there's humongous amount more rhyme and repetition, feet and meter and stuff like that in poetry. Whereas in prose, it's very impoverished in that sense. And prose is also a very yang discipline. It's a method, well, here's an algorithm, a recipe for doing something, or how things go up along. But poetry, there's an associational thing that's going on in there. And you need the repetition and the rhyme, all these things to bring all these different parts together.
Wonderful, thank you, Krishna. Next up is going to be Rich, Joe, and Phil. Rich.
So I'm going to base my interpretation on my my practices, which are come primarily in the area of Tai Chi meditation and the Chinese health practices, or called Eastern health practices. So I've searched long and hard for a translation that kind of mirrors my actual experience. And the translation I'm using is called, let me find it real fast. Yeah. And you need it, you can't find it. Dao, the New Way of Thinking. So it's a Chung Wan Chong out of London. Anyway, he takes a perspective similar to mine that
can you do us a favor? Can you read out from that, the 10th one?
Oh yeah, I'll read it, sure. So just to get an idea, because he has a long introduction to what his way of thinking, he sees the Dao De Jing as a way, that's a way to understand the nature of nature, to kind of basically meditation, to pry into it and to remove the difference, as he says, between the object and the subject. The two merge together, so you are actually in what you are seeing. So when I do Tai Chi, and I've been doing it for 35 years, talking about repetition, I'm doing the same thing for 35 years every day. Mm-hmm. The body melts into the fabric of the universe. It's kind of melts, so there's no distinction anymore between the subject and object. I feel like I am, like you're wedded to a film, like you're watching a movie and you wedded to it. So you become into it. And when I'm in that state, I feel the waves of the universe, and it's the waves that move me. It's not my will, So in order to attain this kind of feeling, there has to be a total absence of will, which I cannot will, of course. I cannot will the absence of will. I have to allow it to happen. And so every time I try to capture the feeling, which is very much within this translation which I'm about to read, whenever I try to make it happen, it doesn't happen. It's when I totally forget about everything and just dive into it, and everything becomes kind of like, I would say almost like one-dimensional or maybe holographic, where there's no sense of depth or space or time. It's just you're kind of like moving in the fabric. So anyway, here's the translation. Can you unify the Hun and the Po? Now, Hun and Po in Chinese Taoist literature is the soul, which is the transcendental spirit, and the Po would be this physical life. And it's very much used in Chinese medicine also, or Eastern medicine. Can you unify Hun and Po into one? So the physical and the transcendental, that's what we're trying to do, into one, and not let them be divided. So you're becoming unified, with removing the subject and the object. Can you concentrate on the breathing to reach harmony and become an innocent babe? So this is one of the techniques to get into it, is to the breathing, which is in many Eastern practices. Can you clean the dark mirror within yourself and let nothing remain there? So you have to empty yourself entirely. Can you love the people and govern the state and do so without interference? So here, love the people and govern the state has to have a much more metaphysical than a physical, because you're talking about entering into this different existence of emerging. Can you enter and leave the realm of non-being and let these actions take place by themselves? So this is what I was talking about, just total immersion without any thought. If you think, if you're willful, it will not happen. You just have to let happen. Then can you clear the illumination, radiate in all directions without your having knowledge of it? So you have to forget about what you've all learned. You have to forget that all. Cultivate it and nourish it. So now they're talking about this sense that you've achieved in this unity. Cultivate it and nourish it. You have to, like I do in Tai Chi, I do it endless repetitions for many years. Produce it, but do not possess it. No, don't try to hold on what you experience. Labor on it, but not depend upon it. Well, basically they're saying it requires practice, but don't depend on it actually happening all the time. It will happen. Lead it, but do not manage it. Again, don't try to use willful essence at all. This is called the mystic attainment. And here it's used the word mystic attainment. I would just use something, translation like this gives you a better understanding of nature. Because I don't consider this anything mystical. I think it's available to everyone. But as you had mentioned earlier, repetition is the key. Repetition is the key to anything. You watch a pianist who plays great. They've done it for decades. The same thing with basketball player. They've sung tens of thousands of hoops. So repetition is the key to everything. And I think people in general find repetition boring. So you have to let's say, you have to trust the process. Just keep repeating it until something happens that will amaze you. And it will happen when it will happen. You never know.
Thank
so
you.
anyway, that's the reading, and that's kind of my interpretation based upon my experiential knowledge.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rich. Really appreciate that, because you're bringing all that experience and it shows. So that wonderful. The only thing I would say about the repetition is that there are all these devices that are designed to actually support the repetition, like the meter, like the sound. Almost, you can see that it's like a musical nature. Music, it just makes it easy for you to repeat things and hold on to the theme across different versions. Thank you. Next up
I'll just say one more thing about that. When I do Tai Chi, I like doing it to music. When I do it to music, I don't enter into that state. I have to be in a totally quiet space where nothing's happening to enter into it. But as terms of helping the repetition, I totally agree with you. I use music all the time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Phil. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of hard to follow that comment, but it's so I'm just trying to bring it back to the idea of the child and the motherly aspect of things in the feminine, and specifically the idea of giving the child space to grow and to become itself, and then the passivity that comes along with that. Because it's interesting to think about the converse. And I think the converse is a very Western concept. It's much more yang, where you have you're looking towards speed, efficiency, and effectiveness, and almost an industrialized, very specific type of way of raising children. It's almost a mechanized way of doing it. And this is conversed. You compare this to what the Tao is saying, a much more motherly, passive, and open way of actually raising a child. And I think that distinction is really critical to call out between the two, because you're talking about the yin and the yang. So I mean, and how you go too far with one or too far with the other, it's just not necessarily going to work. So I think it's speaking more, it's highlighting the importance of the feminine and the wisdom associated with the feminine versus I guess the Western domineering, controlling aspects of the verse, which is actually they get to at the end, the idea of the one who heeds power, having yet not possessing, those types of ideas. I think that's really, really important to, you can kind of see it all come together. Anyway.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I would only say that this East and West is not that simple. Like many of the Eastern cultures are very traditionalist cultures, and they actually force the child to do a lot. They put the culture over nature a lot in many of the Eastern cultures. So it's not that East is far more kind of feminine in raising children and West is not. I don't think it is that simple. In some ways, the children in the West have much greater freedom than to kind of go with their nature than is the case in the East. Next up is going to be, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, no, I was just hoping you could draw a line and it'd be very easy. So I don't think it's that easy. I think you're right.
It's not.
I agree.
It's not.
I agree.
Right. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Kevin. Phil.
Yeah, I forgot who said it, but several people mentioned, instead of thinking in terms of virtue, think in terms of quality. Of course, I always argue about the relationship between quality and quantity. And that's a Western problem of falling into quantity is somehow capturing quality. But I really appreciate that. But on the other hand, I think I guess I have two things to say about that. One is that really isn't that far from what my meaning of virtue is when I say arete, because I suppose I'm a little bit too Greek. That's perhaps a kind of self-criticism, but I really believe in quality. The other thing I have to say about that that's really important is that this quality is not just a kind of universal quality either. It is a quality that's situated within a specific thing in itself. And I truly appreciate that comment that the virtue of a thing is actually different, because I like that idea of differentiation, because we have constructed a society that perhaps is too much believes in identity, that everything is like everything else in some ways. And I think that's important to appreciate that a tree could have certain virtues that is different from what a human being is. So when I was speaking about the human virtues, I wasn't really saying that that should be the only virtues. I really appreciate how I was bringing back to the fact that other things, other living things, perhaps even other inert things, have its own virtues, its own qualities, its own inner quality that is differentiated from other things, and we have to be able to not just depend on categories, but in a sense, separate the distinction. In fact, we want to also extend it to the fact that different individuals, different human beings, different tribes have different qualities that we have subjugated. And I believe that to a certain degree, the Western culture have brought it into a sharp focus in terms of eliminating that in terms of colonialization of others, to force them into our way of being. So I really appreciate that. I just want to underscore how important it is that unity also has within it differentiation. That is very, very important, that opposites.
Wonderful.
Understand.
Thank you, Phil. Next up is Kevin, followed by Jason. Kevin.
Thank you, Frank. I want to follow what you say. See, the Western actually, force kids do repetition, virtue, practice, learning. They becomes to nature. Let's say, like compared to, let's say, our Western, we do let kids grow nature way. Sometimes you need to trim. It's like a tree. You need to trim a little bit. If you keep going, everything doing good, sometimes you lost. Let's come conclusion. That's unity. For me, is everything connected. All makes sense for same goal. Make the kids growing up, growing healthy, with good. However, I would say whether I'm not sure it's the right words or meta thinking or how do we thinking. That matters. Normally we use the dichotomy thinking, let's see, right or wrong, or we bring in is trichotomy. We stay neutral. We can either direction learn something based, kids or nature perspective interest. So eventually, my conclusion is everything is no west east, or you need unity. It's just different perspective. Look like one elephant, the trunk, right? You different seven perspective look of the elephant.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Jason.
Yeah, that's one thing I make a note I want to talk about and I forget. I think that's very important. Probably I mentioned it in my the Asian philosophy meetup because I think technically it's my fault. I'm not paying attention. I always mention that Taoism is from the south and the Confucianism is from the north. And then turn out I mislead the group. Some people ask a question like, oh, I know. People from Hong Kong and China and Taiwan are more Taoism people, and the people from China are more Confucianism people. Yeah, okay. So I just want to focus when we talk about South. That's the ancient Chinese South, which is still north of Shanghai. Okay, Shanghai is like a middle, right? And the Shanghai at that time, people consider Confucius considered as like barbarian. They have the tattoo and they speak like a bird. That's the literally they talk about. So when I talk about south, that means in today's north. Okay. So when I talk about north, it's still south of Beijing. Okay. Beijing is very far north. Okay. During that time. So the territory is much smaller. So I don't want people misunderstood what I meant south. Okay, so we talk about education. I think Brian talked about education. I think the reading Dao De Jing is very important. I read in the early time, and I don't know they have much influence. I just read it, and I think I understand. But when in the adulthood, like Brian mentioned about education, when I become a parent, I find out I will naturally stay away like a tiger mom type of education. So I think that's very good learn. So without thinking too much, what's the application, just keep reading, let the teaching sit in your mind. And then one day you will find out, there's a lot of application in education, running a company. Like Shirin Kang and I, we host the meeting, right? We all know we are leading without controlling. We are not managing the people. We just lead from behind. That's the way we will learn, from the lesson. Yeah, thank you.
Jason, just to get it clear, what would you say is the dividing line between South and North?
Okay,
China?
if you look
is it
at
the mountains? Is it the Kunling Mountains?
No. If you look at the map, okay, probably I should show the map next time.
Yes, please. Okay.
I have the map. Okay, I can show the map next time.
Sure. So if you want, we'll go to other people whenever you're ready. You can just bring it up so that
okay, I'll bring it up in a few minutes because I
sure. Whenever you're ready, just go ahead and type exclamation mark.
Okay, great.
And let's see here. So I want to make one comment. I think of this in terms of nature and culture. So for example, Confucianism is kind of almost primacy of culture and then kind of a little bit of nature, whereas Taoism is kind of primacy of nature, and you're trying to do culture based on that. So that's, that I see as a, as a way of kind of thinking about this. All right, let's see here. So we are at about 10:37. All right, I want to ask a trick question. Okay, I want to ask a trick question. I was talking to my friend Yasuhiko, and he has studied Dao De Jing a lot, mostly through the Japanese scholarship of Dao De Jing, which is very extensive. And his observation is that Dao De Jing is a collection. So it's not necessarily written by one person, and it is written by many, many people. So let me ask a question as an open-ended question, and let's see if you have answers. So we're going to look at the first 9 poems or chapters. And this is what I had come to the conclusion independently, which he said, of all the 81 chapters, there is one chapter in the first 9, which is very different, which is kind of, it has concepts which are actually quite different from rest of Dao De Jing. So there is an odd man out in the first, I think there is a odd man out. Yasuhiko thinks there is an odd man out, whose concepts are different from concepts of rest of Dao De Jing. There are some key concepts. Does anybody have any idea? So you can look at the first 9. The first 9 chapters, not the one that we studied today, but anything that is unusual. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Or we can discuss this next time if you want. Kevin, what do you think?
I would say chapter 1 state everything else. If you keep, let's see, not waste your time, read chapter 1 every day or every time you come here, it's speaking. Yes, it's I'm going to repeat the first 2. Though can be spoken, it's not an eternal though. Name can be named, it's not eternal name. That's speaking everything. You name it, like your concept, logo and figure ground, and order, chaos. I would say that's, yeah.
Thank you. I agree. I think number 1 is good. I think number 25, which is one of my favorites, which kind of sets forth. Is it 25 or 28? I got mixed up here. I'll find out. No, I think I made a mistake. Maybe 25. Yeah, 25. So 25 to me is kind of summarizes the entire thing. I think number 1 does a fantastic job. Number 25 does a fantastic job. Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, just to respond to your
Yes.
question about it, like, yeah, that's I truly agree. You know, and it's not the one author. Because you read it, it's hard to pick up which one. We can go detail when we see that. You will see the tone change, and it probably a collection of the Western saying in the southern, when I say south, okay, southern part of China, and then they have this kind of collection and put together. Okay, so basically, I think that I totally agree with this argument. You know, so but we really like as a book, as a philosophy. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So I'm ready to show the map. Do you want me to show now?
Please, please do. Please do.
So let me show it now. I just find it. Oh, hold on, it's gone. Just let me see. Hold on. Just, do you see the map here?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's the one I tried to show in the last Meetup. Okay. So if you see, that's today's map. You see the green part. That's the China today. There's Taiwan. That's Hong Kong. There's some place, right? Beijing is here, and Shanghai is here in the middle. Hong Kong in the south. Xi'an, that's famous for the terracotta. Yeah. So you see that. That's the today's map. Okay, and this Dao De Jing is talking about probably before the warring state, right? But so basically, they have many states here. So when we talk about South, Taoism is around here, okay? So-called Chu, that's a state. Chu, that's around here. So basically, when we say South is okay, there's two major rivers. One is the Yellow River. Another one on the south is Yangtze River or Long River. Let's know. So when we talk about south, still on the south of the Yellow River, but north of the Yangtze River. Okay. So okay, yeah, when we talk about north, Beijing is here. You see, this one is the Great Wall. Okay, Mongolia is here. So at that time, you know, the cultural area is Qi, this way, is today's Shandong, okay? Why they are rich? Because they're close to the ocean. So they can make salt and have the trading. The other parts are mostly, the other part of China are mostly the agricultural state. But this country, Qi, is rich because they can make salt and say they have the trading. So Confucianism will start here because they have the full of the culture. Okay, when we talk about West, Xi'an, why Xi'an is important? That's a poor area, okay? And the Qing dynasty doing that. So basics, they are not doing Confucianism, they are doing legalism. So turn out the Qing conquered the entire China. Okay, so that's the whole history, and then we don't have to go detail. But that's the concept of the map during that time. And I just don't want people to get confused about like, oh, South is Taiwan, is Singapore.
Yeah, no. I love that. You know, I think reverse. Right? No, I think
area, no culture.
Right? No. I mean, the thing is that reverse is the best way of defining things. You know, between the two rivers.
Yeah, between the two, everything
wonderful.
Just between the two rivers.
And that's very fundamental way of defining areas. Excellent.
One way you can think about is like in the ancient Greek, right?
Yeah.
The east side is more like Athens, right? And the west side is more like, you know, Sparta, right? So that's the word, okay? This word, not to England, France, no, not there. Yeah.
Wonderful. Madeline, you had a comment.
In response to your question about which one stands out, only first 9, my feeling is that it's number 6. The Valley Spirit Never Died.
Why?
2 reasons. One is that it's the only one that's on a single topic. It feels much closer to the original animism of the area. And stylistically, it's the only one that's not full of collections of opposites, contrasting this with that, this with that. It's just on a single theme, and it doesn't contain the opposites. It feels, just feels very different.
Yes, Yasuhiko agrees with that, and he has a couple of explanations. One is that that exact poem appears in another book, completely different, and it is attributed to somebody else, some emperor. So that's one thing. Second thing is that it is unusual because it's kind of equating Dao to female, whereas that's not the case for rest of the Dao De Jing. This is the only place where that is being equated. So those are the two reasons. But absolutely, Madeline, you got it. So anyway, Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you say what I want to say. Basically, it's exactly right. This one is very, very different. And that's all the religious, mysterious Dao religion coming from. And this one, I missed this meeting, you know. But the note is, this one is talk about cosmogony. Okay, how does the world start? Everything, all the mysterious here, you know. So yeah, Madeline, you got the jackpot. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, Madeline, you win. Okay, folks. So thank you very much. Joe, you had something?
No, I was just wondering what her prize was.
Madeline, we'll talk about the prize. Anyway, so Madeline is going to be presenting tomorrow a poem, and which is very, very interesting. So folks, thank you very much. I want to tell you something. We are actually, I'm so impressed with these meetups, but I want to tell you about the other meetups that we are doing, which are also quite amazing. On Mondays, we do Nietzsche, and we are going through Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and we are doing these short speeches of Zarathustra, and we are discussing them in great amount of detail. So that's Nietzsche, who is a philosopher at the turn of the modern age, who is facing up to some of the great challenges that people are facing in their lives. He's one of the first person to talk about it. So that's on Mondays. On Tuesdays, of course, we do Dao De Jing. On Thursdays, we're studying the Bible using Jordan Peterson's courses. And there also what we're doing is that we're not looking at the entire course. Many of us are watching the whole course, but Roger and Victor are picking 4 or 5 key concepts in Bible. And we're doing detailed discussions on those, okay? On Friday, we're starting a new series on flow by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which is about how do you manage this at a psychological level? How do you remain in a state of flow? Not going too far into boredom or confusion. How do you keep yourself in that state of kind of excitation and full engagement? So that's what we are talking about. And actually, all these things, and on Wednesdays, which is in the middle, we do a whole ton of topics. The theme is comprehensivism. So we try to get as many different topics as possible. Now, the interesting thing is that there are themes that run across. For example, the theme of nature and culture is there throughout. The named and unnamed is there throughout. What is moral? How do you think about it? That is there throughout. Each of these people, Nietzsche, Lao Tzu, the Bible, modern psychology, have different answers to it. But there is a lot of commonality to those answers. Some people focus on some aspects much more. So for example, the West is much more sophisticated in naming things, whereas Lao Tzu is kind of keeps coming back to nature and is a little bit skeptical about names. On comprehensivism, we do a lot of science, which is all about, worshiping ignorance, worshiping questions, and keeping the questions going, no matter what ideas you have come up with. So there is a lot of cross currents between these. So in the future, I'm going to start a segment, short segment, where we will add, I don't think I'm going to do this with Dao De Jing because it is so beautiful. I don't want to change anything here. But in all the other ones, I'm going to start connecting, doing what we call syntopical thinking, where we connect up the Bible, the Dao De Jing, Thus Spake Zarathustra, and flow, and whatever ideas of science, art, business that we talk about on comprehensivism. So just trying to integrate both kind of similarities and differences. I think that will allow us to understand all these works at a much deeper level. All right, so that's what I'm going to start off. So thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.